Hello everyone. Today we're going to embark on an extensive lecture on a very broad topic, Christianity in modern Europe. This lecture will cover almost 2 centuries, and it is packed with names, movements, information, important data, because as we move closer to our own era, we'll see how very much impact these people we're going to talk about have had an influence on who we are and where we are today in the church. So let's get started. We're going to begin with a brief look at the French Revolution. You see the dates, 1789 to 1792. Many historians consider the French Revolution to be the beginning of the modern era. Other eras that we've looked at last semester and this semester are the early church from Pentecost to 476, the church in the medieval era from around 476 up to 1517, which is considered the beginning point of the Reformation. Reformation lasting then until 1648, the Peace of Westphalia. Now, the next 140 years are summed up by 3 words: reason, revival, and revolution. And so that brings us to the French Revolution. Again, the beginning of the modern era. So the background to the French Revolution is French rationalism. Right? We've looked at the Age of Enlightenment. The Enlightenment ideas had a significant impact on France, which eventually became a secular state. French rationalism concentrated on social and political implications of reason as understood as common sense. Now, the leaders of French rationalism were Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. Rousseau we've looked at already as part of the Age of Enlightenment. For more information about Voltaire and Montesquieu, look in your textbook by Justo Gonzalez. For now, let's talk about the French Revolution itself. It began on July 14, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille. There were a number of financial, social, political motivations for this rash act by the lower classes, but this was a violent rebellion against the monarchy and the aristocracy. The monarchy had issued high taxes for the lavish lifestyle of the king, Louis the 16th. The clergy also had committed a number of abuses. Remember, the Catholic Church was the state church of France at this time, and all of the typical Catholic abuses were inflicted upon France during the latter part of the 18th century. The nobility as well used their position to gain luxury for themselves and oppression for those who supported them. Then Louis the 16th began to tax the upper classes, and those taxes then trickled down to create inflation. Inflation then brought serious oppression to the lower classes. Obviously, inflation has been a problem for centuries, and it does oppress and hurt the lower classes, who eventually will rise up and call for change. The French Revolution culminated in 1792 with the execution of Louis the 16th. You're familiar with the guillotine, the method of execution that dispatched hundreds of aristocrats, royalty, as well as innocent bystanders who were accused of aiding and abetting the aristocracy when really they simply served them on their estates. But often they, even the servants, were brought to punishment. Marie Antoinette, the queen, was executed. The Dauphin escaped, but then disappeared from history. If you're interested in books and movies about this era, obviously your movie fan right here has some to offer. Uh, Books that were written about this era include, probably the best known is The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is difficult to read. His dense descriptions are hard to slug through, but oh, this book is worth the reading. And then there's two lighter, more romantic, adventurous stories, The Scarlet Pimpernel and Scaramouche. All three of these stories have been made into movies, and let me highly recommend to you the 1984 made-for-TV miniseries, The Scarlet Pimpernel, with Anthony Andrews and the beautiful Jane Seymour. What a romantic movie. My wife and I enjoy watching this over and over again. So do my sons. There's lots of romantic lines in there, so guys, take notes as you watch the film. All right, enough of that. Let's move on to more of church history. The French Revolution was a conflict over economy. The Third Estate, that is the middle class, the bourgeoisie, united with the lower clergy to fight against the First Estate, the nobility and the royalty, and the Second Estate, the upper clergy. And so we have a lower class rebelling, actually revolting violently against the upper class. As a result, we have the establishment of the Republic from 1789, lasting until 1799, including a reign of terror, which was what this period of time was called, when the guillotine, as you see pictured there, was put into very active use to chop off the heads of those who had offended the revolutionaries, the citizens of the new state. Now, there are serious implications for religion. Religion itself was cast down, and in its place was raised the cult of reason, which became the new religion of the French Republic. They strongly emphasized rationalism and freedom. They rejected organized religion as superstitious. Thousands of priests and Protestants were executed for refusing to swear before the altar of reason. You see in the illustration that in the Church of Notre Dame, a prostitute was elevated as the priestess of this cult of reason, and so reason was worshipped. This was kind of a return to paganism. Even after the end of the French Revolution and the end of the French Republic, which came to a conclusion when Napoleon became the emperor, and he actually returned the church to Catholicism as the state religion. But today, the nation of France is strongly secular in its orientation. Friends of mine are Bob and Linda Jackson. They serve here on campus as directors of the Providence Guest House. My wife Margie and I met them when they were missionaries in Tunisia, North Africa. But prior to that, they had been missionaries to France, where they learned the language which served them in Tunisia. But I remember Linda making the comment that uh, uh, ministering the gospel in the Islamic state of Tunisia was more fruitful than trying to share the gospel in France. So secular was this state. All right, let's move on from the French Revolution to talk about philosophical developments during this era. All right, let's review the legacy of the Enlightenment. We've talked about Descartes and his Cartesian doubt, saying that we cannot trust the Bible. Reason reveals truth. We talked about Hume's skepticism. Hume said we cannot trust reason. Everything that cannot be touched is not real. Finally, we concluded with Kant's rational idealism, and he could not trust knowledge. And so the legacy of the Enlightenment led to further philosophical developments. And we'll talk about G.W.F. Hegel, who promoted absolute idealism. The absolute idea is that to which all things are related and which is nevertheless self-contained. This absolute idealism was described as Geist, that is spirit, which is his word for cosmic reason, the great idea or truth or God. What is rational exists, and what exists is rational. Perhaps what that means is that reason is not the limit of reality. Reason is reality, and the only reality is reason. Now, what's most important about Hegel is the contribution of his dialectic. He proposed a three-stage process that forms the basis of his dialectic logic. A thesis is opposed by an antithesis, which then is reconciled in a synthesis, which becomes a new thesis. All right? What do I mean by that? Well, here are just a couple of ideas about how a dialectic works. First, the thesis is man cannot fly. The antithesis is man wants to fly. And so the synthesis is man creates a flying machine. All right, then you can see how this synthesis becomes a new thesis and then develops further to develop passenger planes and then to develop rockets. All right, so you can see how this dialectic thesis, antithesis, synthesis becomes a new thesis and so on. Another example is cars run on gas. The antithesis is the price of gas is skyrocketing. All right, the synthesis is how do we solve that problem? I'm going to leave that to you to figure out. There are a number of syntheses that come to my mind, but I'm going to let you fill in that blank. All right, now let's go back to Hegel. He maintained that this process continues as history unfolds and progresses until society reaches the absolute idea, the ultimate synthesis, so perfect that there is no need for an antithesis. All right, perhaps this is Hegel's idea of God. It is true that Hegel was Christian and did not deny the deity of Christ or the resurrection, but his idea of God was more pantheistic, that God was in everything, and that is the guiding force behind his dialectical ideas. Okay? The reason that Hegel is important to us is that he had tremendous influence on others whom we are about to discuss. Let's talk about intellectual developments that came about during this modern era. Evolution, proposed by Charles Darwin. Communism, calculated by Karl Marx. And then psychoanalysis, whose father was Sigmund Freud. So let's move quickly through these three intellectual figures who greatly influenced Western civilization from then until now. Charles Darwin, you see his life dates in the 19th century. He was an English naturalist who formulated the theory of evolution during an expedition to South America. It's interesting that Darwin had studied for the priesthood, but obviously he abandoned that idea and went in the opposite direction. During an expedition on the Her Majesty's ship, His Majesty's ship, the Beagle, he went to South America, and there he was inspired to write The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, this idea of evolution, of survival of the fittest. Again, this was built on the Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and carried to an extreme then. Each subsequent synthesis and thesis was a development of the different species. He applied this to humanity and wrote The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. You see from the illustration that the humorous caricature of Darwin as the monkey's uncle, and this idea that we descended from apes. Right? He taught that species develop organically by natural processes of descent, and only the fittest biological specimens of each generation survive. All right, this is the process of natural selection. Now, he did admit that some changes may seem to occur spontaneously, the concept of mutation. And so from Darwin, we get the idea of the X-Men, the mutants. All right. So that's maybe that's the one good thing that came out of Darwin's theory of evolution, a whole new comic book and species of superheroes and supervillains. Well, moving along from there, I have a more serious question to ask, and that is, how has Darwin's theory of evolution impacted Christianity? And of course, the answer is greatly, because there are those who attempted to harmonize Scripture